All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Drinks with Independent Bottlers. My name is Oliver Maruda. I'm one of the founders of the Whisky List, and tonight I'm joined with our whiskey specialist and educator, Emma Cookson, as well. Welcome, Emma.
Okay.
Super quick formal housekeeping. Don't drink and drive. Drink plenty of water. If you want to add water to your whiskeys, go ahead. We always recommend with some of these whiskeys, especially some of the higher ABVs and ages, get 5 or 6 different glasses out, pour them out, keep the order so you don't get it mixed up, and let them breathe. Yeah, there's some subtleties of flavor that will come out after some of these whiskeys breathe. Any questions, put it into the chat or just unmute yourself. Super casual tonight. And we've got 6 whiskeys. Emma, do you want to quickly introduce the tasting order while I'll paste it into chat?
Yeah. Oh, I'm just typing it into chat right now for you.
Well, you got it.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of keep them in the groups of IBs just because it's going to work with the flavor profile of each one. So that's kind of convenient. We're going to, number 6, not number 5 is Ledaig. Yeah, so we're gonna get cracking with the rolling casks. So the 2 rolling casks are going to be our first drams for the night. We're going to start with the Glenrothes, which is super duper exciting. Now, Ollie, did you want to talk a little bit about who Rolling Cask is? They're obviously super duper new to the Australian scene, so they're not something we would have come across very often in our whiskey bars here.
Yes. Let me just grab one more whiskey from my cabinet. I'm going to talk to it.
Should have been pre-prepared.
All right, Rolling Cask. So the story of this, a wonderful guy. He is super big in the wine industry, and he imports a lot of wine into China from all over the world. Through his industry connections, he also enjoys, a whiskey or two every now and then. And long story short, in a space of, less than a decade, he now is the proud owner of about 100 Scotch whiskey casks. 100, yeah. Like he said, more than 100. Some located in Australia, some already in China for local bottling, but the majority of them are in Scotland. And because of Scotch Whisky Association laws, to be called a Scotch whisky, it has to be made in Scotland and bottled in Scotland. So what we're drinking tonight with the rolling casks are all Scotch that are being made and produced and bottled in Scotland. This is he's released 3 now under the Rolling Cask label, and there'll be many more to come. I just wanted to highlight the first one that he did was a Deanston, and it's called the series, the Kung Fu series, and there's a total of 5. So this one, I believe, is pretty much all sold out. It was featured at the Melbourne Whisky Show late last year. The Glenrothes is the second one in the series, so that's the next Kung Fu bottling. We'll chat about the tasting notes, but one of the things that always, because he bottles for China and he doesn't really know the Australian laws, he actually wrote contains sulfates on the back, but that's just the legal requirements in China. It doesn't contain any additives, any sulfates, anything like that. So I just wanted to clarify that's just him following what he's used to, and we've been helping. The Whisky List has been doing a bit of distribution and importing for him here, and we've really enjoyed the whiskey. So yeah, we've brought it on as a product that we're going to keep showcasing this year. And I've just got the label for the third one, which is not part of the Kung Fu series. It's in its own separate bottling called just Orkney. It's not a secret Orkney. It's just Orkney. I think he was meant to add secret Orkney on it, but that's another little mistake of him. But yeah, really cool labels. He uses an artist overseas to just put these 2 together. We've had a question around IP, and I believe in China he's already been threatened legally for using the Kung Fu series. He was originally going to call it Bruce Lee series, but they stopped him, so he had to get some labels remade, and I think that's how he's got around it for now. So it's one of those cases. No one's challenged him in Scotland and Australia so far, so we're lucky to keep the labels going, and we'll see what happens. But that's a very quick introduction to Rolling Casks. There's 3 more Kung Fu series to come, and then as and when casks are ready, he'll start releasing them through his label Rolling Cask, and he does some of on his website, but predominantly most of his new releases will come through the Whisky List first, because he's not too interested in running e-commerce himself. He just has set it up there, but it's more important for him just to work with local producers and retailers like ourselves and our independent retailers to get it out into the market, into your lovely hands. So that's Rolling Cask.
Yeah, it's convenient because, it's obviously being big in the Asian market. Makes sense. Look next door. Oh yeah, Australian people drink whiskey as well. Yes, please bring more over here. So the first one that we're trying is Glen Ross. We're actually trying two whiskies that are both owned by a parent company called Edrington, which is kind of super interesting. And I really enjoy seeing how parent companies parent to their distilleries. So the first one is a Glen Ross. It's clearly a refill sherry butt. You can tell it's a refill and nothing too fresh based off the color it's given. But yeah, Glenrothes is part of, it was built in 1878 during what's called the third wave of whiskey distilleries. So like in the 1870s, you had a lot of companies who were like, well, whiskey's popular, quick, let's build a distillery. And so you had them cropping off all over the place, only for them to shut down very soon after, because the 1880s and 1890s, it took a nosedive. So Glenrothes was opened by the founding investors who were all actually Macallan owners. And that's kind of how the Glenrothes that we try today, you can see that Macallan influence in a lot of their bottlings, their core bottlings today, and even some independent bottlings. They are very familiar with sherry. They're very into sherry. And you'd be hard pressed to find like old full maturation bourbon cask Glenrothes. They usually finish it in fortifieds. But yeah, so the company called themselves Highland Distillers, which was hilarious because they only had Speyside and an Isla distillery. They had Bunnahabhain as well. And they were both used for like the Cutty Sark blends. And eventually they sold it to Berry Brothers and Rudd. They sold it to the Cutty Sark majority owners. They were like, well, you use it, you want the distilleries anyway, here, take Glenrothes. And 2 decades later, they sold it right back to Edrington. So it's back into the Edrington family now, and it sits alongside, they actually still own Macallan, and they own Highland Park as well, which obviously Secret Orkney or Orkney Distillery, there's only kind of 2 reputable distilleries on Orkney. So statistically it's Highland Park. So this is a really cool opportunity to see Glenrothes, because when they took Glenrothes back on, they changed it. And so they were like, okay, we used sherry before, but now we're really going to use sherry. So it's interesting to see how this is kind of that repurchase, I suppose you would call it, of Glenrothes, to kind of see more of that subtler sherry profile, and more of that bourbon shining through. What do we think?
It's obviously sherry, but it's a much more, it's not a sherry bomb. It's a quite clean.
Yeah.
And what are we drinking? It's 51%. It's quite a hot whiskey for the first one, I think. Let your palates warm up, have a couple sips, and then go back and then enjoy the flavors. Michael says candy on the tip of the tongue, mate. Yeah, like those hard rock candies that you get with like the fruit images stamped into them and whatnot. Yeah. So this was distilled 2008, bottled 12 years later.
Yeah.
Do you like it, Emma?
I do enjoy it. I will say Glenrothes in a sherry cask, like a first fill, fresh, juicy sherry cask, you just can't go wrong. But this is really nice because it showcases like the candied elements, like Michael was saying. But yeah, I think this is definitely one to put aside for like 10, 15 minutes, let it breathe to get a lot of that like alcohol off, but once you do that, it'll just come through with those like rich apple candies. I don't know if anyone's tried, they're called Jolly Ranchers, but there's this like apple flavored Jolly Rancher. It's this hard candy thing in America, and it's just that fake apple flavor, but it's so delicious.
I like how Paul shook his head in
He's like,
disgust, and
no,
Michael is
how dare you?
nodding in it's going, we've got
Yeah,
some
he knows what's up. Yeah.
Well, you
I
mentioned
yeah.
letting it breathe 10, 15 minutes. Should we, if everyone's got at least 2 glasses, should we jump to the Orkney and then come back to this one and see if it's changed? Do we do a side by side?
Down for that. Grab my olive oils.
Thumbs up in the room.
Awesome.
Good to see you back. 2 nights in a row, Leo. We did the Craftworks tasting last night. A few other faces here, so it's.
I think Leo was here for the whiskey sponge as well, weren't you? Yeah, committed. I think therapists call that a problem, but you know. All right. Well, another Edrington distillery. Secret Orkney or Orkney is usually the name given to Highland Park. Because Scapa doesn't independently bottle much. And while there are other distilleries on Orkney, most of them produce either kind of like an entry-level blended whiskey, or they mostly make gin, or they're mostly not in like the mainstream kind of what we ever see globally. They're Scottish only kind of brands. So statistically, this is Highland Park. And there's another reason that we know this is Highland Park, and it is to do with the Edrington group. So kind of going back to the start of the history, it's kind of a bit murky. There's no quite confirmation on who originally founded Highland Park Distillery and what it was originally called. We didn't know it as we do today until the 1870s. But before then, in the 1700s, there's talk of it was either founded by a Scandinavian priest turned smuggler or a local farmer. And there's not enough records to really differentiate who it was that founded the distillery and how legal perhaps the operations were. But it didn't start properly becoming a real distillery business until the 1870s, when the owner of Milton Duff at the time, William Stewart, came in and was like, I'm going to actually do stuff with this distillery, and I'm going to get it out there, and I'm going to put it on the map. So
Emma,
yeah,
I heard obviously the priest smuggler story of the illicit distilling, but then the taxman fell in love with the island, and he bought the church or the lighthouse or whatever he was doing whiskey in the basement, and then he unofficially, because he had his connections through being the excise man, took over Highland Park for a little while before the next owner came around, and it all officiated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And because as well, Orkney is near, is it Norway or Denmark? I always get them confused because I'm real bad at geography. But Orkney is kind of like, it was one of those islands that was partway between Scotland and partway between Scandinavian countries. And so for a while, it kind of had a blurred history of who owned the island. So you actually have a lot of people on Orkney with really Scandinavian names. So like Ericsson is the most popular surname on Orkney, obviously, and being very Scandinavian, Nordic, Danish, they went with the ship label.
They were conquered by Vikings, and for hundreds of years there was a Viking outpost. So yeah, you will have a mix of Scotch Viking ancestry there. And if you've bought normal Highland Park, they've obviously doubled down on the whole Viking history with amazing bottled labels, that sort of stuff. But yeah, there you can see, hopefully the camera's, it's a bit dark there. I need to turn on another light. You can see the Viking ship, which I think's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as Ollie said, like their regular bottles, they had a local artist actually design the Celtic knots and stuff for their bottles. They're really pushing heavily into that that history of the island. They've got those cool releases, Valkyrie, Valhalla, all those ancient kind of things going on. But yeah, so kind of moving more into as we know it today. Highland Park was acquired by Edrington. It's actually been under the Edrington label the longest out of all the distilleries. And it's always kind of been predominantly like about 60% bourbon cask and 40% sherry casks in a lot of their regular core expressions. But in 2017, they repurchased, as it were, or reacquired Glenrothes, and they decided, right, we've got Highland Park, Glen Ross, Macallan. We have these great connections with bodegas in Spain for getting sherry seasoned casks. Now that's an important point, is a lot of the casks are sherry seasoned and not full maturation sherry casks. And it just means that the sherry has been in there for a shorter period of time, and most likely that sherry is not going to be used for drinking. It's going to be used for cooking. So it's not the best quality sherry casks, but it's interesting to see how those sherry flavors still come through and how it really affects the base spirit. So in 2017, they were like, right, we're going to, across all of our distilleries, we're going to focus on sherry. And so as a result, you had thousands of bourbon cask barrels from Highland Park that could no longer, that didn't fit. They were like, well, you got to use more sherry. So sell off all the bourbon barrels. So that's why we've seen this absolute influx during the last, 5 years or so of Highland Park secret Orkney bottles. Again, so statistically, Highland Park, because of the absolute influx from that change in wood policy. So it's really, really interesting to see. And I think it's a great opportunity to get bourbon, cast Highland Park while we still have the reserves, as it were, out there in the market space.
Look, I enjoyed a sherry whiskey as much as the next person, but there's something about the balance of spirit that married with an ex-bourbon cask that just highlights the quality of the distillery. And I think that showcases here. I'm just reading some of the comments. So Leo's jumped in with honey, a bit of light peat. We'll talk about the peat in a second. Brian and the nose, definitely a Highland Park nose. That was the first thing that caught my attention, and we'll chat about. I think Highland Park is known for changing their recipe quite recently compared to some of the older bottlings. So this is very much an older style Highland Park. So if you've enjoyed Highland Park 15 and older ones, even Highland Park 10, over a decade ago before they changed some of their recipes, this is that style of Highland Park in a bottle, which is great. They've captured it, and that's some of the reasons why we like independent bottlers so much, is they can keep some of that style. Distilleries get new master distillers, every few years. They change ownership with different companies and recipes change, but independent bottlers can keep, a piece of history. I think it's quite exciting. Michael says getting the coastal peat as well, honey as well. Oh, a lot more going on with the Orkney, spicy, sweet, and a nice long finish. Did you say this one was sold out? No. The Deanston, which was the first one of the Kung Fu series, I believe is sold out. We do have bottles of the Glenrothes and the Orkney still available. And because all you legends joined tasting tonight, Chris just messaged me. We'll talk about it later, but we're offering 20% off selected whiskies, including the Orkney tonight. So I'll post a special link for you all to jump on if you want to grab it. Just because we like you all, and I think we're celebrating our Icons of Whiskey Award win, which is starting to hit the press, which is quite exciting. And we just want to pass on our love and thanks to all our customers, because you guys helped us get there. We're a family-owned business, and we do it because we enjoy whiskey so much. So we'll get that link out at the end of the tasting as well. I did want to flag, this is 17 years old. It's 52%, distilled and filled in 2004, 337 bottles, entirely bourbon, hogshead, non-chill filtered, no other colors, traces, nothing. It may contain some cask sediment, is what it says on the label. He doesn't provide any tasting notes, so I think it's what we've been tasting and describing today. But I just wanted to highlight the coastal peat. Some people, when we say peat, they think Isla, they think that iodine, is really strong. This is such a gentle peat, and to me, it's super smashable. I really enjoy this whiskey.
Yeah, I think it's that really interesting thing of where a distillery sources its peat from as well, because you've got distilleries on Isla that use Isla peat, and they typically are Diageo family ones. They get it malted from Port Ellen, but a lot of distilleries, even on Isla, use Highland peat from Aberdeen, and these guys use Orcadian peat. So believe it's Island peat from their region and whatnot. And that honey note that Mike was getting is bang on. This reminds me of another indie bottling from the Society. I think Orkney Beekeeper's Dram or something like that. It's just got all that like lovely honey smoke thing, like you're smelling freshly grilled fish from afar, and it's glazed with something sweet. This is my favorite style of Highland Park. I've never been the biggest Highland Park girl, but this style and the way that this is integrated is what I like.
I'm a huge fan of the old recipes. I remember, I think the first time I did travel retail, flew to Europe. I've got family in Poland and around Europe. And yeah, you go through, you get the Highland Park tasters, and I fell in love with the distillery and the whiskey. And then I went back to a few years later and it changed for me. Obviously, they updated the recipe. And this just reminds me of that old school Highland Park that I really enjoy. So it's good to rediscover the distillery of flavor notes, and I personally enjoy it. And hopefully, we're getting nods around the room. I was at a virtual tasting with the senior brand ambassador Martin Marx Vaden, who's been at Highland Park for decades. If you Google his name, just brand ambassador Highland Park, it's this giant Viking dude, but he's the sweetest, gentle giant. He kind of looks like a Danish Thor. Or Chris Hemsworth, but he's just tatted up. He's got the big giant Highland Park. He should be in a war movie, not pouring whiskey, but he loves his whiskey. And he was telling us they've got 40 or 50 islands around the Orkney region, and the locals have designed a test of that island is inhabitable or not, and it's whether or not you can leave 2 goats on the island for at least 12 months and come back and they're still alive, and then that's how they decide if that island can be inhabitable. So, a bit of fun local history there. But Leo, you've mentioned going back to the Glenrothes. I was just about to suggest, if you haven't gone back, try it now again and see if it's the alcohol burn has kind of reduced that you've mentioned there, and hopefully we get a bit more balance in the sherry.
It's got a bit tea cakey. It's got a lot more of those like cake, nutmeg kind of flavors backing onto it as well. It's very cool.
It's become drier for me.
Yeah. Another great tale about Highland Park. I think I've met Martin as well. This is years ago. And he was telling us about how, because Orkney is so far north, they actually have a lower angel share, so less evaporative loss out of the casks compared to Islay or mainland Scottish distilleries. But the Scottish government allows a tax break of up to 2% angel share loss every year. But being on Orkney, they usually get, 1 to 1.5% angel share loss. And he was telling this great story about how when he was starting out of the company, the distillery manager was like, Martin, come here. Remember, son, we're all angels now. And he just starts cracking open casks until they, lost 2% from all their barrels. And I was like, I mean, it's dodgy, but the government's paying for it anyway. And that very like down to earth, but also rebellious kind of side, I was absolutely enamored. And it's a tricky place to get to, I believe, on the you can only take the ferry if the sea is good, and it's the shortest little plane trip between the islands, but it's definitely worth making the
There's
trip.
2 airports on Orkney, and it holds the record, I believe, for the shortest. Like, I believe it because
It's
it
like 46
passes.
seconds.
Yeah, it passes the international date line or the merit. I don't know, one of the lines.
Meridian,
Yeah, that one. And because of that, it holds a record for the shortest international flight of 43 seconds or something. You go up and go down basically. Yeah, so if you ever get to do it, but they keep mentioning visit on a sunny day and just hope and pray that you can actually go back because the ferries they're built for choppy sea, but some days it gets very stormy up there, and you basically can get stuck in Orkney for a bit of time. But it is a distillery. I personally haven't visited, but I want to. It's on my hit list, and everything I've heard about it is amazing. So a piece of Orkney in our glasses tonight.
Mm. Yeah, I see Michael loses a candy, moves towards a dry biscuit cake taste. 100%. It's got that like it's almost got a little bit of lemon peel, kind of, when you get the bitter underside of the lemon as well with it. It's very cool.
For those who have your cameras on, right hand if you've enjoyed the Glenrothes, and left hand if you've enjoyed the Orkney.
That's cheating. All right. Looks like the Orkney just nudges it out.
Yeah.
Some people are voting twice. It's a rigged election.
I think the Orkney wins for me as well.
Yeah.
I think the Glenrothes, open it, leave the bottle, for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, shelf mates. It's gonna get better as it, breathes and oxidizes in the bottle and even in your glass. But yeah, the Orkney is just such a good specimen of old school Highland Park, and at the price it's going for, 17 years old. Yeah, I think it's a steal.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And that's the thing with the Glenrothes as well. Like, having worked in whiskey bars, I've come across a lot of bottles that are super hot as soon as you open them. I remember the Whiskey and Ailment Triple Berry Lamington cake release. We got it, we cracked it open, we were like, oh my God, this is hot, what have we done? And we just left it open on the bar for an hour. I'm not joking. We left it open and we walked away for an hour and came back to it, and it was exquisite. It was jammy and delicious. And it seems like such a weird thing to do with a bottle of whiskey, but when you do have that really like cask heat at the top, it really helps, and it makes such a difference. So yeah, definitely not a weird thing to do, I promise.
Good time to jump to whiskey number 3 and 4. So if you got 2 glasses again, let's do a side by side. The Whiskey Blues, I can never pronounce. Sorry for my terrible Gaelic.
Teaninich.
Teaninich. I would have.
I know.
And Glenlossie, I do know that one.
Yep.
Has it got any connection with like Lossie, the lake, or is it just?
Not. I imagine it would be built nearby. It is another Speyside distillery, but not 100% certain. That's the thing with like most of the names, is that they're based off of where the distillery was built or something that inspired them, and that's where they took the Gaelic name from. But sometimes it doesn't work that way. Like I was talking about Glen Grant the other week, and it was, well, named after the Grant brothers who founded it. So sometimes it's purely egotistical. So yeah, this is a really cool one. If Ollie, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Whiskey Blues?
Hopefully everyone knows the story of Johnny Walker, where he started as a grocer, started buying local single casks, but he found them inconsistent, so he started blending them. And then there's an amazing ad on YouTube. I forget the name of the actor. He basically, in one take, just walks through the entire history of Johnny Walker. But this is pretty common practice for independent bottlers. Quite a lot of the most famous independent bottlers, Gordon MacPhail, Cadenheads, like they've acquired these casks from these distilleries, but they also run other businesses on the side. And Whiskey Age slash Blues, because they've got two brands. Started off as a merchant. They run a supermarket, and they're based out of Taiwan, and they were making whiskey flavored ice cream as part of their supermarket experience, just to have a point of difference from the Audis and Coles and Woolworths based in Taiwan. So they would buy bottles of Cahuilla, Laphroaig, super peaty whiskey, super sherried whiskey, Macallan's, and they would just, make gelato and various different ice creams with these flavors. And I don't know, long story short, they somehow got a few local fans, connected with the whiskey industry. They attended some whiskey, shows in both the UK, Scotland, and locally. Taiwan's huge fanatical whiskey base down there. They love their whiskey there. There are some bottles that are only bottled for Taiwan exclusively, and we never see the light of day. So through those connections, they just started buying whiskey casks. And because they run a supermarket and they were importing goods from Europe and the UK especially, they already had a supply chain set up. So they, just extended it to buying whiskey casks, getting it bottled in Scotland, shipping the bottles over. And, long story short, they, again, in less than a decade, have acquired over 100 different casks. They haven't released that many under their label, but they have done heaps of other bottlings for a lot of bars in Taiwan. So Taiwan has similar to Japan, very micro drinking culture, where you go to your local, and your local will actually have like a dozen different labels and casks that they've bottled for themselves through partners like Whiskey Age Blues, and whether it's Cadenheads or Gordon MacPhail or Highland Distillers, for example, is another well-known one that we work with. Taiwan, similar to Japan, they do these independent bottlings really well. So what we're drinking here is, and we'll go through the two releases shortly, but yeah, these are just local releases. As of 2 years ago, they decided, okay, Taiwan, market's pretty saturated. We're getting quite a lot of awards on Whiskey Fun and Whiskey Base and all various other sort of places around the world. They're starting to get noticed. So Kelvin and Yao from the Elysian Whiskey Bar, who run an importing business called Select Spirit, they have started importing them into Australia as well. I was keen on doing it, but my Taiwanese or Chinese is terrible, and we were struggling with Google Translate back and forth. But the guys helped me out on that, so they started bringing it in, and we said we'll feature it as part of our February independent bottlers drop. So these are two different whiskies. They've done quite a bunch of releases, and keep an eye out on the Elysian Whiskey Bar, and selectspirits.com.au is their bottling e-commerce site as well. We feature a few on our site, but these two, I've tried a few. They've gotten some Ledaig, some Cahuillas and stuff like that. And the Whiskey Blue, what did I write as my notes, Emma? Do you remember the difference between age and blue?
I think the blues was in that very kind of storytelling style, where the blues was that sharing kind of experience vibe, whereas the Whiskey Age is more like, it's about the spirit itself rather than the feeling that it evokes. Especially Taiwanese independent bottlers have this incredible kind of emotional connection often with the spirit that they bottle. There's another company called Liquor Fang, and they literally do their labels after the album that the whiskey inspires them to listen to. So they came out with a black one because the whiskey was the one to drink while listening to I think it was a Metallica album, and then he did another one which was Purple Rain, and that was a Ben Rinnes. And so they're very much influenced by how the whiskey makes you feel when you drink it. So I think that's kind of how they wanted to take the difference between the two. One's is the very feeling emotional, and then one's the very, it's about the spirit and the character.
just to add, and I found my notes, Emma, finally stuck in another tab. Whiskey Blue is only bottled by the palate of its founder, Rex. Is it Rex Weng? Whilst Whiskey Age has that collaborative view, he has established a tasting panel of the best whiskey bars in Taiwan, and even some musicians as well. So that's, I think, where the music connection and artistry comes in. So he's got a huge tasting panel. So the Ledaig, which is whiskey number 6 on today, is picked by committee, while these two right now that we're tasting is just picked by the palate of one guy who is quite revered in the industry right now.
Yeah, I love how like a lot of those like smaller countries have that kind of, they do see whiskey in that way, and it's not just like, sometimes it is just one person, but one person doesn't necessarily have the same kind of flavor palette that you do, and so they outsource, and then having those musicians and artist people as well picking stuff is just really, really cool. Wish we could get more liquor fang in the country now that I've been reminded about it. But yeah, this is super cool. And obviously, Teaninich is not a super common distillery for a lot of people. They're a workhorse distillery, as we would call them. And it was, weirdly enough, built by a Napoleonic war hero named Captain Hugh Munro. So in the early 1800s. And he kind of ran it as a pet project, and then it was sold on. Eventually, it was picked up by DCL, who we now know as Diageo. And Glenlossie is also a Diageo distillery as well. So not only are these whiskeys coming in, independent bottling pairs, but they're also coming in parent company pairs as well, which is quite fun. But yeah, so they actually make huge quantities of single malt for the Johnnie Walker blends. So Teaninich is predominantly used in Johnnie Walker blends, whereas Glenlossie is used in Haig. So it is used in Johnnie Walker as well, but it's mostly Haig blends that you'll find it in. And they eventually, they were like, well, we need to make even more single malts for our blends because, it's becoming super, super popular. And so they built an identical second distillery on the same site. Super, super common thing to do for larger blending house companies. And they eventually closed the original distillery, the original Teaninich, and now they just run the second distillery, which is the newer one, obviously, because people aren't as into blends anymore, though, obviously Johnnie Walker is still very, very popular.
Where is the distillery located?
It's in the Highland region.
Okay.
So it's a Highland distillery. Yeah. It's one that we don't even see. I don't think there's a flora and fauna release of it, is there?
Not in the last 2 batches.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely one of those overlooked distilleries, but it was designed to give such like a soft, light, floral fruit flavor. And I think I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher your name pronunciation, Guobin, really hits it on the head with that like stewed orchard fruit and the peach. So good.
I'm getting this is the most oily whiskey I've had in a long time. It like sticks to the upper echelons of your entire mouth. If you swirl it around, it kind of, it's super sticky.
Yeah, like tree sap.
What's ABV on this one? This is the 53.6.
Yeah,
it drinks
cool.
like it's 40 though, like 45 or something. I don't know. That's for me personally. I'm not finding a massive ABV or sort of alcohol burn on this. It's quite subtle.
I think that you get that as well often from these blending powerhouse distilleries, is that like their spirit character is designed to be so approachable. Oh yeah, Hacknock. Yeah, the spirit character is designed to be so approachable. So even when you find it at those higher ABVs, it is still super drinkable. Yeah.
Paul nails it on the head for me. I agree with the orchard fruits, stone fruits there, but that hint of barley, it's that's what maybe is giving it this earthy sort of feel.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump to whiskey, the second one, I just wanted to highlight some of the labels. So I don't have any of the ones that we're drinking today, but if you ever get a chance to try this, and I'm tempted to put this on a tasting, it's a Bunnahabhain 31-year-old 1989 from Whiskey Blues. So each of their labels has a different sort of character on it. Sometimes it's mythological, with battles. They do feature a lot of cats. So if you can see, sorry, my light's a bit blending, there is a tiny little cat face there. I don't know why so many Asian bottlers have a fascination with cats and whiskey, but it's a thing. This one features, which one's this? This is the Cahuilla, I believe, 13-year-old. Yes. Features whales, basically. So fun, easygoing label. And then we're back to a series of cats. So this is one of their Christmas editions that they did. This is another Cahuilla. They're all cask strength bottlings, which is really cool. And they just really enjoy. Every label is different. Everyone has a story. I try to Google translate their story, but like whiskey, when you translate Chinese into English, actually Google translates it as wine. So I'm reading the story of how this guy's found this cask, and it just says, I've picked this wine, I bottled this wine, decanted this wine, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I thought we were talking about whiskey, and then I realized there is no Chinese written form of whiskey and wine is interchangeable from there. But done a quick look at my notes. Whiskey Blues has 400 casks under maturation, aged from a 4-year-old Cahuilla to a 40-year-old Laphroaig that are going to release later this year. So they've got crazy amounts of stock. And in terms of if you're on your independent bottling journey, Whiskey Blues / Age are ones to keep an eye out, because they're getting stuff at a decent price that I think even Gordon MacPhail and the Caden heads of the world are just not seeing anymore, because they've exhausted quite a lot of their stocks. And these guys are bottling at cask strength. They're not watering it down to 45% or anything like that. So it's a really Michael, I have no idea of the price or when it's coming out. I know they've got one sitting there, so I'd love to acquire one too, and keep an eye out. As soon as it hits the markets, I'm going to put a bid on it for sure.
Yeah, I will say as well, if you ever want a nice giggle, Asian websites, because Google Translate is completely imperfect, sometimes it comes up with the funniest and most positive sounding things you'll ever see. I remember Jules from Whisky and Ailment got an email talking about an auction, and he Google translated the email because it's from a Japanese auction house, and he was like, 9-year-old authentication? Oh, do they mean Auchentoshan? It was like, well, it's the closest. It's the closest you're gonna get to the Japanese word for Auchentoshan. So it's quite fun. I've seen bottles where it's just like, this bottle has the horse on it because the whiskey is powerful like horse, and that's just literally how it's written. The whiskey is powerful like horse, and you're like, I feel so positive about this. I love it.
Shall we jump on the Lossie?
Let's do it. Let's jump on the Lossie. So another workhorse distillery from Diageo. This one does have a flora and fauna release. There have been a few, I think, 10-year-olds coming out on the flora and fauna. I love Glenlossie. It is one we don't see super often, which is heartbreaking. But I always have described Glenlossie as a really pretty whiskey. If you ever get the opportunity to try really old Glenlossie, it just gets more refined and dignified with that age. Some whiskeys can go quite hot, they can get quite complex, they can, get real funky, but Glenlossie always stays super pretty, and just pretty on the palate, and absolutely fantastic. So this was another third wave distillery.
Have you tried this one, Emma? It's not as pretty as you're describing it.
Well, I haven't finished my Teaninich. Old Glenlossie. Like I'm talking 20 years plus old Glenlossie is really pretty, especially bourbon cask.
I'm getting it's like rubbery notes or something in there. It's I don't know. I'm enjoying it, but you described it as I was expecting floral. I don't know why, but I'm not getting that at all.
Maybe it's because you want to, prove me wrong. But yeah, I will admit I haven't had much Glenlossie in sherry casks. It's been predominantly all bourbon because again, it is a blending whiskey, predominantly blended into Haig's with a little bit of Johnny Walker. But it's also the site for their warehouses. So a lot of Diageo's casks are actually matured at Glenlossie, and they again built a second distillery on the site, which is Minnick. So they're actually right on the same location, next door to each other, because they're both blending whiskies, and don't see too much of either of them outside of independent bottlings. Leo, thank you for checking up on the flora and fauna. Look at you go, there is a Teaninich. Awesome. But yeah, that's the thing, is like, that's why I think we love independent bottling so much, is it allows us to glimpse distilleries we would never see otherwise. And it's heartbreaking because, that Teaninich was delicious. And to not be able to access that is just sad, because we like whiskey. We like all whiskey.
I think I've only had this distillery once or twice before, and you're right. I've only had it as a bourbon cask, my first sherry one, and I don't know. The more I drink it, the more I'm enjoying it.
It tastes like Chinese 5-spice blend. Oh, I'm so into that. It's
I'm getting
so
like
weird.
pork belly vibes.
Yeah. Like Szechuan. Yeah, absolutely. Spearmint. That is a good call on the spearmint. I definitely got that mintiness to it. That kind of like real vegetal thing.
We had this at the Whiskey Sponge where we ended up, describing a beef stock and Maggi noodles and, unami and all this, and this has got plenty of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I know quite a few of these bottlers will do like cats with ramen on the label as an illustration, and maybe that's this is why maybe this unami sort of flavor that comes through.
Yeah, it's very much tonkatsu pork broth. So cool. Yeah.
Are people vibing on this one? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Bit interesting. Yeah, Michael T's ambivalent. Other people are into it.
Michael S, thumbs up, down?
Undecided, or comes up.
Or hopefully you've got both in your glass. Should we go back to the Teaninich? I'm gonna give up on the name.
You just gotta say it fast. Teaninich.
It's Teaninich.
Teaninich. Really? Yeah. It's one of those things I've had it all sorts of ways. It's one of those. But yeah, Teaninich.
Wait till we get to Laphroaig, and I've been to plenty of tastings where the brand ambassador presenting or bar owner have called it Ledaig. And
horrifying.
Well, for a long time, that's what I thought it was, and that's just Aussie whiskey, industry here. And then someone's pronounced it as Laphroaig one day, and I was just like, "You mean Ledaig?" And then back and forth, and we eventually got to what we meant. But yeah, it's
That was like I remember Julian telling me he went to Craigellachie, to the Highlander Inn hotel, I think is in Craigellachie, and he got there, he's just like, yeah, the Craigellachie, and the death glare they gave him, and they were like, it's Craigellachie, and he was like, oh shoot, I've been saying it wrong for so many years, but he feels a lot better because the Melbourne rep from a few years ago still calls it Craigellachie, and it was like, we just leave him, we just enjoy hearing it come out of his mouth, because it's just brings up the mood every time. But yeah, there's so many weird and
I think
scarring Gaelic.
Michael has nailed it on the head for me as well. It's somewhat confusing. Not sure what it's supposed to be. Keeps changing. I've had 2 or 3 sips, and every time this Glenlossie is different. It's still 2009, 12 years old, 56.7%, and it wants to be something. It's just maybe it's fighting between, like, I don't know. Yeah. Is it trying to be a Highland whiskey? Is it trying to be Speyside? Is it trying to be like a Springbank or something? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Lossie's a Speyside distillery, but I mean, like I said, this is the first kind of real full maturation rich sherry cask I've tried it in. And in bourbon cask, it's honey on crumpets. It's very like soft, gorgeous, elegant, breakfasty almost. And this is lunch. This is like a lunch meal at a nice, like a really nice yum cha place. It's got all those funky, like you were saying, umami characters. That's because I like weird stuff.
What's caught me, what has impressed me by the Glenlossie is, we think of maybe a bell curve. It's the best way to illustrate it. A distillery will have its natural bell curve, whether it's Highland Park, McAllen, Laphroaig. We've got a Laphroaig coming up next. This sits out on the outside of that bell curve in terms of flavor profile you're expecting from a whiskey, and it's challenging what I know about in terms of whiskey flavors. And we've described other whiskeys that have had that vegetal, pork tonkotsu sort of palate, but it's not something I normally go for a whiskey. But at the same time, now that I've had it, I want to try it again. So I'm going to be looking for, is Glenlossie, is this a signature profile of Glenlossie sherry casks that we can come to expect, or is it a one-time bottling, never to be repeated again? I'm curious personally.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it does have that. It's one of those weird things. A lot of people would say that this funkiness is a flaw in the whiskey, depending on how old school you are in terms of whiskey production. But it's so cool to see it. You think of how would it taste if you put a Glenlossie, if you only knew it from a bourbon cask, into a sherry cask, and it completely disrupts those expectations for me. So, and I think that's really cool, and we shouldn't be so down on sulfur and savory and funky and weird. But obviously, if you're not into it, you're not into it.
Has everyone finished their 2 whiskies?
On to the next, the Williamson and Karnmore. So Karnmore is probably an independent bottling name you guys are a little bit more familiar with. It's a little bit more prevalent in the market. And it belongs to a company they used to be called Morrison and Mackay. They're now just Morrison Distillers. So James Morrison bought out the company from the Mackay family because they actually have a distillery of their own called Aberaghy, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong because I haven't spoken to anyone from there yet. But they've got their own single malt that they're planning over the next few years. And so the Morrison family was like, right, we want to take back control of the independent bottling. We want to take back control of the distillery. We just want to do this, make it a family business again. And they're actually one of the oldest families in Scotland. So the Morrison family is responsible for the best years of Bowmore. They actually owned Bowmore Distillery back in the 60s to early 90s before selling it to Suntory. And some of the Bowmore that was produced during that time is arguably the best ever made at the distillery. So they had a lot to live up to with their name, and there's a lot to live up to with their new distillery. But yeah, so they had this range. They partnered with the Mackay family and set up a independent bottling shop in Perth, in Scotland. And the Karnmore is their kind of core series. So they're usually smaller batches, only a couple of barrels vatted in, and they always keep it at 47.5% ABV to keep it that approachable flavor profile. So it is going to be, I think it's the lowest ABV, but because it is a Laphroaig, left it a little bit later, and it is a young Laphroaig, so you're going to get a lot more of that vegetal funkiness to it.
So I've learned all the Karnmore bottlings are 47.5%.
Yes, I believe so, that moving forward. So back in 2019 was when they bought out the Mackay family and decided to rebrand as Morrison Distillers. Before 2019, I think some of the Karnmores were kind of flirted in between that, 43 to 48% ABV, around there. But now their focus is to try and get every single release at 47.5 ABV. It's kind of a magic number for them, I suppose.
I love that Gobin jumped ahead and he cracked this whiskey, and the first thing, it's, for me, I've just poured it in my glass. The whole room is just instant Laphroaig peat, and you nailed it on the head. And Emma, do you want to tell the story of why it's called Williamson?
Yes, it's one of my favorite stories in all of Scottish history. So Williamson.
Sorry, do we know, maybe touch on what teaspooning whiskey and all that stuff is? Because I know we mentioned Secret Orkney, but I think this is, just so we cover all the bases, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So so independent bottlings, not every distillery likes to be independently bottled, but needs being must. Sometimes they have barrels that they just can't fit into their flavor profile, or they've come out a different flavor profile, or for whatever reason they have spare whiskey, right? But because they're so close to their chest with their brand reputation, they don't allow them to use the distillery name on the bottle, which is why we had a bottle called Secret Orkney instead of a bottle called Highland Park. Though there have been some that have Highland Park on them, and they really have to come at the approval of the distillery. So Laphroaig has always refused to have their name on a bottle unless unscrupulous IBs do it anyway and forget. So they use code names. And another way that they can kind of protect their reputation and also, have that money incoming is a process called teaspooning. So something Balvenie does a lot. So Balvenie, if they need to sell barrels, they will say, right, I've got these barrels, but I'm going to teaspoon them. Glenmorangie does it as well. And what they do is they literally put like a teaspoon or a small amount, sometimes, a liter or so, into the barrel from another distillery. That makes it a blended malt, which means that the independent bottler can't demand a higher price for it. So, say you're Laphroaig and you've got this 40-year-old barrel, like the one that they sold to Whiskey Blues Whiskey Age. And you're like, right, I do want to sell it, but I don't want you to make more money on it than I could. So I'm going to teaspoon it so that you can't, make claims and, you can't use our name on it and stuff like that. So it is kind of a protection for a brand reputation. And when you're as big as Laphroaig and Balvenie and Glenfiddich and Glenmorangie and stuff like that, it is very important that what consumers are getting when they buy a bottle with your name on it is that quality that you anticipate and that they anticipate. And that's not to say these bottles aren't quality. It's just that I've tried a lot of funky, weird, independent bottlings from these huge distilleries that taste nothing like their core release. And for consumers who aren't aware, they would be like, well, what's wrong with this? What's happened to this? And, people who've been drinking whiskey for a long time can understand and appreciate, but, there's just that safety net for brands, making sure that their name isn't necessarily on a bottle that they haven't approved and checked and double checked.
And
Like,
teaspooning, I was just about to say, gets very complicated. So if you ever see Burnside, it's a Glenfiddich cask with a teaspoon of Balvenie. If you
it's a
see,
Balvenie, because Balvenie
sorry,
is Burnside,
yeah, sorry,
Glenfiddich is Warhead.
I'm getting on the mixed way around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Balvenie with a teaspoon of Glenfiddich is Burnside. Ward head
Mm.
is Glenfiddich with Balvenie teaspooned. And you've got Westport, Glenmorangie with Glenmoray. You've got Blair Findey, which is Glenfarclas, and we've got Williamson. Where's the name of Williamson come from? I think that's the coolest story in all the teaspooning.
No, yeah, Ward Head is Glenfiddich. WARD. I can never pronounce it properly. I'm sorry. Macallan does allow indie bottlings. As far as I'm aware, Macallan doesn't do any teaspooning, which is actually very surprising.
That's Kintel?
Hmm?
Kintel is Macallan.
It's not Canevy?
It might be that one as well. I've maybe, I don't know. I've seen both.
Yeah. Again, the code names make it even harder because you see Loch Lomond on bottles, but then sometimes you see Haddock. And Haddock is a code name for Loch Lomond, but for some reason the same independent bottler can use Loch Lomond on one release and not use it on another release. It gets a little bit confusing. But one code name that we're all absolutely 100% positive about is Williamson. And that comes from Bessie Williamson. So Williamson is always Laphroaig. It always refers to Laphroaig because of her. So she was actually hired back in 1934 as a shorthand typist for the distillery. She went on holiday. She thought she'd have a few weeks away to Isla. Had a holiday, decided to pick up some work while she was there, and very, very quickly became the right-hand woman of the owner, Ian Hunter. They became very, very good friends. Ian picked up on her natural talent and her affinity for the whiskey industry right away. He was so impressed with her work ethic. And at the time, Laphroaig mostly employed men. So it was definitely very interesting to kind of see this woman progress through the ranks. And Ian wasn't a young man by any means, and he had a stroke in 1938. And after his stroke, he was like, I want you to take over distillery operations. I want you to run the distillery, deal with the US export market and stuff like that. And she, gung-ho, she did it. She looked after the distillery during World War II. She kept it afloat, essentially. They provided shelter for a lot of soldiers. And it was absolutely incredible. She then called in a favor years later to get the military to use their aircraft to install the new stills because they were too heavy to crane in. So she was definitely a very, very clever woman. And when Ian Hunter died in 1954, he left everything to her. He left her the entire distillery because at the time she was the most qualified person to run it. She had been running distillery operations. She had, handled every aspect of the business side. And, through her years of tenure at the distillery, she improved it, she grew it, she hired as many local people as possible. So she gave so many jobs to people on the island, and she was absolutely respected by every single employee in the company, as well as by every resident on the island. Like, they called her the Lady of Laphroaig, and eventually, after her passing, they called her the First Lady of Scotch. And she was such an icon and such an inspiration in her field. If you get the chance to really read up on her life story, it's incredible. So obviously, when you think of Laphroaig, the first thing they want to do is honor this incredible figure who is, nobody really remembers, unfortunately, Ian Hunter and his time at Laphroaig, but everybody remembers Bessie Williamson. So that's how we get the name Williamson on independent bottles. though I believe Laphroaig is trying to crack down on it a little bit. They're like, well, people still know it's Laphroaig. I was like, well, what else are we going to call it?
I love that Leo has said instantly the Laphroaig Lestoplast, so that Band-Aid iodine that they're known for. What is interesting about this, it is only an 8-year-old whiskey, so distilled 2013. I've just got the bottle. Oh my God, there's too much reflective light. Can we see that? Hopefully it's gone into focus. So yeah, it's 47.5%. It is 8 years old, distilled 2013. It's a bourbon hogshead. The first thing that I noticed is just the color. It is very pale compared to quite a other Laphroaigs of this character, but texture, vegetational taste is there, as Leo says, is really intriguing. But where is the peat on the palate? It is super fresh, zesty. It's almost got a creamy underbelly. It is got peat on the nose, but the peat on the palate is not there. And I don't know, we're enjoying it. I think it's a delicious whiskey, but it's not a quarter cask or a PX Laphroaig for sure. Where is that peat? I don't know how they've done that, but that's the magic of independent bottling, I guess.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'll admit I'm not the biggest Laphroaig fan. I prefer the much older age statements where most of the peat is already blown away. But this is, it's very like if you took lemons and charred them on a barbecue and squeezed it out, and that very dry grass. It is a lot more subtle than we're used to Laphroaig being, and I think that's so cool. So cool. I love Leo's comment, more power to pioneering women in male-dominated industries. Absolutely. It's, one of those things, and I'm very thrilled to be working in this industry, though, I did have to put up with years of, so do you actually drink this stuff? No, the pay is just really good. So yeah, absolutely. And I highly recommend it if you're a bit of a bookworm. I've got this, picked it up myself. It's called Women in Whisky by Fred Minnick, and it's really amazing. It covers like American female distillers and Scottish female distillers, and even Kirsty Lark is mentioned in this book. So definitely worth checking out if you're a big reader. It's very enjoyable. Oh.
You got a book already there. I can see Karen and Ian. They're covered.
Yeah.
I haven't got that book, so it's I'm going to add it to my list.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I did a recent Laphroaig catch up with a bunch of mates. It's probably the photo's been seen on the socials. We talked about Whiskey Sponge. It was last Wednesday's tasting. They have one called Bessie's Dram. It is up there as probably one of the best Laphroaigs I've ever had. And if you ever get a chance, it's probably astronomically too expensive at auctions. I tried, it's just hard to get. But, Laphroaig, just like all distilleries, whether we're trying it tonight or other, it's so versatile. And people go, oh, I don't like peated whiskey. And I'm like, well, you've maybe only tried the Laphroaig 10-year-old or something like that, or the quarter cask or something in the core range. Go to the independents, try stuff like we're trying the Karnmore tonight, because it will give you a different flavor profile of the distillery and showcase how unique it can be. Michael got a request. Will any of these be at the show? Yes and no. The rolling casks will be, because I love them so much and I want to share them with Australia. So, we'll be definitely asking for a table if David Ligoff and the Whiskey Show team will let us have it at the show. The others, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. So Kelvin and Yao, any of the whiskey shows in Melbourne, they are going to be joining as a pop-up bar. So if they can't be pouring it at the table as part of the show, there's going to be a separate bar where you can pay like cost price drams essentially to try the whiskies, because some of these bottles are just inaccessible. So this is a great way to support a local bar who's done so tough over 2 years of lockdown, and they're going to come to both the Aussie Whiskey Show and the Melbourne one. And I'm begging them to come up to Sydney and some of the others as well, because they're such good guys running it. But they will be running a pop-up bar, and yeah, they will be, because they're the importers of Whiskey Age and Blues, they'll be bringing it in, and you'll be able to try some of their others there for sure.
Yeah. Super cool.
Where are you based, Michael? Michael T.
I mean, not to stalk you, but Sydney? Wow. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry you have to live in Sydney.
Don't remember me from the last show?
I do remember you from the last show. Yes, I do. Yeah. Well, there'll be more Laphroaig at the Sydney show at the very least. So, you'll have to drown your enjoyment with that.
Sounds terrible.
It's awful.
It's a hard life.
Absolutely.
Whiskey number 6.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it all to Emma, because this is her favorite distillery. I've mispronounced it a few times tonight, but Emma, over to you. Why Laphroaig? Some people call it as Tobermory, hyphen Laphroaig. There's many things going around, but tell us a little bit about this distillery and then the whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, it's my favorite, and if you don't like it, we're not friends anymore. But also, it's actually one of the oldest commercial distilleries in Scotland, based on the Isle of Mull, like about 100 kilometers north of Islay. So still an island distillery, but they're the only whiskey distillery on the island. There's a gin distillery there as well, but we don't really talk about them because Tobermory makes gin, so why would we bother? So it spent most of its 200-year history closed. So, obviously founded in barfly flying around, founded in 1798 by numbers. And it changed a lot of hands. So it was founded by John Sinclair, and he managed to keep it going for about 40 years before having to sell it on. And then the next owner sold it on, and again and again and again, to the point where over another 40-year period, it had so many different owners that nobody bothered to keep track. It was just parcel of distillery. And during that time, obviously, it wasn't a super financially viable option. It's an island distillery. Transportation for getting the barley there is hard. Transportation for getting the whiskey out of there is hard. We've seen Islay had its own issues. Bunnahabhain built a dock just to be able to make those transportation trips. But being, the only whiskey distillery on the island wasn't really, worth. They had to use what infrastructure they could. So nowadays we know it as Tobermory Distillery, but obviously Laphroaig is another name for it. And the differentiation from that comes from the original founder, John Sinclair, called it the distillery Laphroaig. So the D is a CH sound, and it's technically pronounced Laphroaig. Like, can I have Laphroaig, waiter? But because of the D, and because it's kind of a little bit hard to properly say it without the Scottish accent, we go for kind of an in-between, and we call it Laphroaig. But it means safe haven in Gaelic, and it was the original name of the distillery. But the town that the distillery is based in is called Tobermory. So different owners decided to call the distillery different names. Some owners called it Laphroaig, some owners called it Tobermory Distillery. And so for years, all the way up until 1992, nearly 200 years after it was founded, there was no consensus whatsoever on what the distillery is called and what the whiskey was called. So when a company called Burns Stewart came through and decided that they wanted to buy it, they looked it through the warehouse and were like, what the hell is going on here? Because you had unpeated barrels called Laphroaig, you had peated barrels called Tobermory, and it was just a mess. to say the least. So what they decided to do, they were like, no, right, we got to sort this out. We do want to make an unpeated, because that is the traditional style from the original distillery. But we also want to make a peated because people are very fond of the peated whiskey made here. The distillery is going to be called Tobermory after the town. The unpeated whiskey is going to be called Tobermory. And then everything heavily peated is going to be called Ledaig. So Ledaig is 40 ppm, about the same as Laphroaig and Ardbeg and Caolila and places like that. But it's got this incredible creaminess to it that I think really carries the smoke super well. Absolutely, like Paul says, the kind of smoke builds up as it goes along. It is such an approachable whiskey, which is not a word you typically associate with heavily peated whiskies. And for me, like Ollie was saying before, most people try a Laphroaig 10 and they don't like it. I am that person. I still won't touch Laphroaig 10. Don't even think about giving me Ardbeg 10. I've never enjoyed them, but that's just me. But as soon as I got my hands on Octomore and Ledaig, I went bonkers. It's all about how the smoke interacts with the spirit. And I think that this is one of those distilleries that just works and assimilates so well. So I'm really curious to see what you guys think. And if you
as you're tasting and typing in tasting notes, just a couple things I do want to share some photos. Is that coming up?
Mm-hmm.
So that's Tobermory.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful village. All on their graphics. It's on their gin labels more than the whiskey, but they have these beautiful old school buildings that are hundreds of years old, and you sail into the port or catch a ferry, and they're all beautifully coloured, and tiny little island. But the typical white sort of distillery, as you see on Isla and stuff like that. But what I did want to actually highlight, and Billy Walker of Glendronach and now Glenlossie, he ran Tobermory, Ledaig and Deanston for a little while. That was his first job. He's been in the whiskey industry for a long time, but there's that Billy Walker's first job as a distillery manager was running Deanston and Tobermory. And a lot of the whiskey that we're trying, old Ledaig or old Tobermory, is Billy Walker's style, and it influenced a lot of his stuff before he, bought, modern day Glenglassaugh, Benriach, Glendronach, and now he's moved over to Glenlossie. But since Distell Group, who owns Bunnahabhain, Deanston, Tobermory, Ledaig, they've appointed, you can see here, Clara Gibson, I believe is her name. She's 28 years old, and she's the youngest master distiller in the entire Scotch whisky industry. And her palate, like Dr. Rachel Barry from Glendronach, adores her because they both worked at Bowmore, I believe, before, and women have better palates than men. That's scientifically proven. There's nothing we can debate about that. They can smell better phenols, better tasting notes. Since Cara has taken over Tobermory, she's introduced gin as well. It's a bit of a cash flow thing, and the gins are amazing. We've been nerding out about it, but she's taking the whiskey industry and Tobermory and Ledaig into a whole new. She doesn't want Bunnahabhain to be the number one brand in the Distell Group. Basically, she has ambitions to be Tobermory, Ledaig to be better than Bunna, essentially. And for someone of against a lot of men in the industry who've been there for a long time, going, this is the way it's always done. She's just come in there as a fierce as lightning, essentially, and gone, let's get all our amazing stock out into the market. Let's stop hoarding it. Let's start getting people tasting it, and let the distillery and the spirits tell the story of what Billy Walker and the previous distillery managers have made when making great spirits still, and let's put Ledaig and Tobermory on the map, because Isla has its own map and everyone knows about it. Everyone knows about Jura as well as another island distillery. Everyone knows about Campbelltown, but not many people know about this Isle of Mull, essentially. So, that's my bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I've found for years that Ledaig is such an underground cult kind of thing. You know, like coming from the bar industry, I've spoken to so many bartenders who are like, I love Ledaig. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, but I just don't get access to a lot of it. And it really is that thing of, if you know, you know. So I personally want to make it one of, Australia's better known, like a better known brand here in Australia. But I just love it. I can't say enough about it.
Just conscious of time. I know we're up to an hour and a half almost. I've just launched our poll for tonight. Just curious to get what everyone's enjoying tasting. I know you can only vote once, makes it super tricky. So jump in the comments and tell us what close second usually is. But yeah, we'll share the results in a minute. Leo, I know it's very hard. I think I'm stuck between the Ledaig and the Williamson, but the Glenlossie has caught me by surprise as well. So
yeah.
Just a general question for the group. Are you enjoying these virtual tastings and the caliber of whiskey? I know not every single one's going to be unicorn style, but just breaking it apart and learning about some of these distilleries who don't have core ranges and Welcome, Michael. Yes.
Well, hopefully, Michael, I'll see you in person at other tasting events shortly enough. I know that you're big into the tastings, but yeah.
All right. We've all voted. Let's have a look. And the winner is the Orkney.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very,
fantastic.
very close by the Ledaig.
Yeah. I'll pay it. The Secret Orkney is pretty fantastic. It's just got that smoked Manuka honey thing that is just lovely. Just lovely, to say the least. So
I think Emma showed the bottle before. Emma just recently celebrated her birthday. Happy birthday. So as a little gift from the Whisky List team, that was the bottle I picked out for her.
Very excited. Very, very surprised and very pleased. I will say though, the cat card was pretty good. I think David picked out the cats. So, but yeah, no, very, very glad to have that bottle at home now. So,
well, officially, thank you. I think this is the end of the tasting, but I'm happy to get people off mute. If there's any particular questions, we can stay on for a few extra minutes. Otherwise, what else we got coming up? March is all about Irish whiskey.
Yes.
Sorry, the link. Let me post the link so you all have it, because that is very important.
Yeah, so we've got a celebration of Irish whiskey. Our World Irish Whiskey Day is on the 3rd of March. I will actually, if anyone's based in Melbourne, we've got only a few tickets left for the Bushmills dinner degustation, which I'm very excited about. We've partnered with a wine bar because all of the Bushmills are wine cask, so wanted to switch it up a little bit. And I think we've got some Bushmills tasting as well lined up for the month.
It's sold out this morning, so all 100 tickets are gone.
You didn't get one, soz.
But because of the theme, so March is Irish Whiskey Month for the Whisky List. February was Independent Bottlers. We've got a bunch of really cool Irish whiskies, some Hyde, some Middleton, and this morning in the warehouse, some Waterford has arrived, 4 or 5 different. So we'll explain all that next week when we get into March, but keep an eye out for that. I've just shared the link, so whiskme /thanks, that's 20% off for a selected bunch of whiskeys today. Is a little thanks to all our lovely customers supporting us and helping us win the Icons of Whiskey Award online retail of the year. We're in the finals against Abbey Whisky and Celtic Whisky Group. So I don't know, that to me is just phenomenal that we even got a mention there. And it's really cool that we announced that. I've got requests, hey, are you exporting and stuff like that? So long story short, we called a couple of Australian distilleries yesterday and said, hey, UK retailers now want to start stocking Aussie whiskey. Can we bottle some whiskey and do some for our membership and then send some overseas? So keeping a lookout for that. Otherwise, we'll be pouring the rolling casks at the whiskey show. And depending which one you go to, we might have one of the new Kung Fu series coming out. I'm not sure which one it is, but it will be released soon. But we definitely will have the Glenrothes and the Orkney that we just tried today. The Orkney is on special 20% off as well. So being the favorite, jump on that. I think it's on page 2 on the link.
Yeah. I see, Leo, that none of the dates work for you. I'm sure we've got other events that we are going to be doing throughout the year now that we have someone based in Melbourne. I would obviously love to do more whiskey events in person and stuff, and we might have some of them coming up later in the year, but hopefully you can make some of the shows next year and we'll see your face there. But hopefully looking forward to seeing all your faces in person now that we can finally have shows again and do this without lag. So
So we're doing a Bushmills virtual tasting. So I just mentioned sold out in March. There might be another Irish one that we do, but we're also going to do under the theme of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The whole leprechaun theme is it's going to be our first top shelf tasting. So if we did any of them last year, we basically buy whiskey bottles that are $500 plus. And we crack them open at cost and we enjoy them as a team and as a virtual tasting. So the first one's going to be called Pot of Gold, and it's going to include, I think, a 25-year-old Springbank, 40-year-old Bunnahabhain, all independent bottling. So I need to work out the costing and stuff like that. So, but keep an eye out for that. It's called Pot of Gold at the end of the rainbow. That's our very first top shelf tasting. So that's coming out as well. But jump on the link. There's some really cool specials there. And otherwise, thank you for tonight, and we'll see you at the next tasting.
Thank you so much, everyone.